Hello, I'm Shani and today I want to talk about Bettie Page. I saw this cover for Perfect magazine starring Lila Moss and instantly recognised it as a Bettie Page tribute, and then I saw the quote and I was right. Bettie Page is instantly recognisable by her arched brow and her signature Betty bangs, not to be confused with the hime cut that we saw Gaga sporting at the Grammys this week. A hime cut is an ancient Japanese haircut often worn by nobility or royalty. Hime translates to princess. As we see more of a comeback of black, leather, animal prints, sheer glamour coming down the catwalks, it's only right that I give you the lowdown on Bettie Page because her influence always rolls around again. But we also need to look into why. We have seen countless designers reference Bettie Page. We've seen covers such as this one for V Magazine by Stephen Klein starring Katy Perry and Madonna. Katy Perry, actually, her whole look was based on Bettie Page when she first came out. We've seen Beyonce reference her in the video phone video and the telephone video. Tongue twister. Irina Shayk dressed as her for Halloween. We saw Megan Fox with the Betty Bangs at the Met Gala. Even at the Grammys, I think Claire Cottrell's look was quite Betty. Also, hello, Helmut Newton. Zendaya at the Schiaparelli show, the underwear is outerwear at Jean-Paul Gaultier. I could go on and on. But who is this mystery woman? Well, Bettie Page was voted most likely to succeed by her class back in Nashville. She has a very traumatic childhood dealing with SA. So eventually she decided to flee and fulfill her dreams as an actress. So she moved to New York City in 1947. Here are some of her early headshots that are actually from 1945 and were shot in San Francisco. But this is what she looked like around the time. One of the first people she shot with in New York was an NYPD officer named Jerry Tibbs. He shot her first portfolio and he actually suggested that she cut a fringe because it would stop the light reflecting from her high forehead. And thus the Betty Bangs were born and she began to create this new image. After she shot her portfolio and started passing it around, she gained more and more attention and began modelling more. She would start to pose for camera clubs. Now, camera clubs came about in the 1940s and basically it was where people would go to shoot nude imagery because it was still restricted by law to produce these types of images in the 40s and beyond. Her approach to posing has been described as uninhibited. Growing up, she'd often spent time in her room copying models' poses, copying how actresses posed. So she had kind of been training to be a model for a long time, whether she knew it or not. Now, the use of that word uninhibited, I need to highlight because obviously, as I said, she was a victim of child SA. And I think one part that often gets left out of the Bettie Page story is this typical pipeline of traumatized child, liberated, uninhibited woman, mental breakdown, healing. And we kind of see Bettie Page go through that same path. What I find interesting about this, in terms of her being also a fashion icon after the fact, is that it's a story as old as time. We saw it with fashion's obsession with Marilyn Monroe, and it's not just fashion, it's the media in general. We saw it with Billie Holiday. Why does the media love a traumatized woman? This whole concept was the formula of Lana Del Rey's success. She kind of manufactured that and put it in her music, and it works. Look how big she is. So I think anytime we can attach a beautiful image to dark feelings that a lot of people can probably relate to, somehow it makes it more digestible. So with that said, she was quickly recognized as the pin-up girl. She was shooting with Irving Klaw pretty much every week. He and his sister Paula were photographers and they met at these camera clubs, and Betty would shoot with them pretty much on a weekly basis and produce images for all of these magazines. She started to make a name for herself. And it was in this scene where the signature Bettie Page style comes from, the one that we see on mood boards and in shoots and on the cover of Perfect magazine today. That's the seam stockings, the leather, corseted belts, of course, the hair, the makeup, a lot of animal print. Betty became synonymous with animal prints like leopard and zebra because of a photo shoot she did in the 50s with Bunny Yeager. Bunny Yeager was a fellow model and she took Betty to a wildlife park and she shot these iconic images of her with the zebras and most famously in between two cheetahs, and she was wearing this leopard ensemble that she'd made herself. Betty's daytime look was more demure and covered up and more typical of 1950s dressing. And this is where I think Betty became a most copied woman of the time over many other starlets. And I think it's because of what her haircut means. Because a lot of women dressed like this in the 1950s. These were pretty typical outfits. But because of Betty's notoriety in the kink scene, the haircut that she was famous for, I think now when a lot of us because I had the haircut too, by the way. I think a lot of us who have had the haircut and a lot of us who will have the haircut, it's that kind of nods to what the haircut symbolizes. It symbolizes cheekiness, it symbolizes sexuality, and the haircut speaks for Betty, even when she's wearing a pastel sweater and a poodle skirt. It's the hair, it's the little leather belt and the little curve in the heel that lets you know that Betty is Betty. I think if you were to show somebody, you know, a picture of Bettie Page in her civilian clothes, with the hair, it kind of has a if you know quality to it. It's the dressings of somebody who has a bit of scandal and mystery around their name. But just copying the hair is like the most entry level way to align yourself with someone like Bettie Page without doing any of the things she actually did. And interestingly enough, the microbang has now become a symbol for the far right to use as an identifier of like who is too woke. And I mean woke in the way that the far right mean it, which is like almost evolved into their version of a slur against people that are like have sense. But I say that to say that Bettie Page and her lifestyle definitely wouldn't have been accepted by the masses in the time that she was working. Hence why she was the star of a secret camera club. Betty eventually graduated into the world of burlesque. She was performing alongside stars like Lily St. Cyr, and current day burlesque stars like Dita Von Teese also cite Betty as a huge influence. If you think of somebody like Violet Chachki, who's had huge success in the burlesque scene, she also references Bettie Page a lot. She even has a song called Betty. Bettie Page was Playmate of the Month in January of 1955, and her pictures were so successful that she ended up winning the title of Miss Pinup Girl of the World. By 1959, Bettie Page completely retired from modelling and she became a born-again Christian before kind of fading into obscurity. And that mystery of her disappearance probably adds to why people love to reference her, because it's another layer of mystery that surrounds her look. But the fact is, when she left modelling, she really struggled with mental health. I mean, and throughout her modelling career, but it's been documented that she had immense struggles. I don't want to go too hard into all of the unearthings about her life. There are plenty of documentaries about it, but I do just want to make a point to say it wasn't just as simple as, okay, I'm finished modelling now, I found God, I'm going to go and live a happy life. She really struggled. And a lot of that is not really considered when she's referenced so heavily in fashion. I do still wonder if the fact that Bettie Page specifically turned to religion in her retirement is a part of the reason for that sexy nun trope. I'm sure it existed before her, but when I think of images like Rihanna on the cover of Interview magazine shot by Nadia Lee Cohen in the nun outfit, very controversial, and all of like the religious undertones we see in Madonna's work. Obviously, she has a Catholic upbringing, which is a huge influence, that reckoning between religion and sexuality. But I do wonder if in some mood boards, Bettie Page was kind of poster child for that. This is a very brief history on the life of Bettie Page. I hope it inspires you to go and do some of your own research. Did you ever get the Bettie Page haircut? Have you ever done the Bettie Page look? Because I feel like we've all done it. Have you seen her reference in fashion? Let's talk about it in the comments. Bye.